Good evening, everybody. This is Mary Lynn Cardell. I'm a registered dietitian, and today we have a UNL dietetic intern, Rachel Malloy, giving us a presentation on soy and soy foods. Thanks so much for all of you joining in with us tonight. Hope you've been able to enjoy the beautiful weather we've had this last couple days. It's so nice to finally have warmth and sunshine. So I'm sure you've all enjoyed that as well as all your kiddos. I'm sure that's been really nice for them to be outside. So today, the webinar will be about an hour long. You'll have receive a certificate for an hour webinar, and I will be sending out those webinars certificates within 48 hours of the completion of this webinar. In order for us to verify your participation, we will have several polls during the webinar that we'll need to ask you to participate in, and also there'll be a survey at the end of the presentation. We do need that survey to be completed in order for us to recognize you as a participant in this webinar. Today, Rachel will be presenting. If you have any questions, there is a questions tab. Please feel free to ask any questions, and we'll get those to Rachel during the webinar. She also has several handouts in the handout section. So she'll talk about those handouts. I would recommend that you download those handouts so that they are available to you. If for some reason you do not download them today, you should be able to go back into the GoToWebinar series and download those. But some people have had some issues with that in the past, so it's probably easiest just to download that right now. And if anything else comes up, if you have any issues with hearing us or any other questions, please feel free to ask. So I want to introduce you to Rachel, and I think she's done an amazing job with this presentation, and I hope you all enjoy it. So go ahead, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Mary?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yes, I am Rachel. Oh, just there it goes. Can you guys all see okay? I think. There we go. Okay. So today we'll be talking about soy and soy foods. And first, I'll give you just a brief introduction to myself. I am currently a dietetic intern at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, but I also did my bachelor's degree, my undergraduate degree in nutrition and dietetics at UNL. If you guys are at all familiar with the Eat Family Style Dining program run by Dr. Dipti Dev and her team, I did work with that for over a year, and now I'm going to have to take a break since I'm doing my internship, but it's a great program. I suggest checking it out if you haven't heard of it. I really want to work with infants and young children and expectant mothers, so this population that you guys work with is really an area of passion for me as well. So I hope we can kind of connect on that bit, and I hope that'll be reflected in my presentation. I grew up in Nebraska, although I did move to Chicago for a couple years in high school, and I have two young nephews. Well, they're not so young anymore. They're 10, and the 11-year-old is about to have his birthday, like in 2 weeks. So I do have some experience with children. I also worked at Educare, volunteered at Educare for a while, and I have a real passion for just this population, and I hope that you guys feel that way too. So our objectives for today we have 3 objectives. First, to identify the importance of soy foods during pregnancy, especially for women who follow plant-based diets, although this can be applied to all women. Understand when soy-based infant formula should be given to babies and how to introduce soy when feeding solid foods. And then recognize which soy foods are creditable under CACFP and how to incorporate them into children's diets. And this picture that I have on the right of the screen is actually some baked tofu. Before this, preparing for this presentation, I hadn't really explored tofu or like tempeh or some of these other things that I'll be talking about, but I've kind of stepped outside my comfort zone and tried them over the last few weeks, and it's been really, really cool. So I'll share with you guys lots of recipes and ideas for incorporating these foods into your menu at your facility. So first, we're going to have a quick poll on what is your view on soy. So I believe Mary's going to put this up.
You could just go in and answer one of the questions of what is your view on soy and soy foods? Can you see the results? Rachel, are you able to see the results?
Yes, I can see them. Yeah, so we had 22% say I love soy, 74% say I'm not very familiar with it, and 4% say I dislike soy. So it kind of popped me out of my slide, so I'll have to get back in there. There we go.
So I'll hide the results now. We can go back into your slides.
Okay. All right, it's loading. There we go. Okay. So now that we've learned kind of about what you guys, it seems like most people aren't very familiar with it, and I was kind of in that same boat. So hopefully this presentation will be pretty informative and you'll learn more about it. So just to give you a brief overview, soy and soybeans, I guess, are a plant native to East Asia, and they've been grown there for who knows how long. And they were introduced to North America in 1765 by China, and currently the US and Brazil actually produce the most soybeans worldwide. And what I found kind of surprising, well, maybe not surprising if you're familiar with livestock feed, but 85% of soybeans are actually processed into soybean oil and soybean meal. So the majority of them we're not even really consuming. Instead, 97% of soybean meal is actually used as livestock feed. So that's a lot of soybeans that are being turned into soybean meal, and then being fed to livestock. So the other byproduct when producing that soybean meal is also soybean oil, which is used in vegetable oil. And then here's a brief list of some common unfermented soy foods. I'll kind of explain the difference between unfermented and fermented in a second. But first off, we have soybeans. These can be either roasted and turned into soy nuts or boiled. And we also have edamame, which is a mature or immature soybean. So they're really similar. Edamame is just plucked earlier. And then there's soy milk, which is made from soybeans, tofu, which is made from soy milk, and it's just pressed into like a cake. So as you can see in this picture, these little cubes over here are actually uncooked tofu. Soy yogurt, which is also made from soy milk, and soy flour, and textured vegetable protein, which is made from soy flour, which I believe is kind of similar to soybean meal. And then we have some unfermented soy foods, or common fermented soy foods, I'm sorry. And I have included pictures here because I wasn't very familiar with these other than soy sauce. And fermentation just means that they've added yeast, bacteria, or other microorganisms to foods. So common foods in the US that are fermented are things like bread, alcohol, chocolate, cheese. And so as you can see, we have miso, which is a soybean paste or sauce that if you've ever had miso soup, that's a component of it. Natto, which is fermented just plain soybeans, and that's a common breakfast food in Japan. And tempeh, which is a soybean cake made from fermented soybeans. So it's kind of similar to tofu in that it's been pressed and made into like a cake form, but like I said, tofu is made from soy milk, whereas tempeh is made from the actual soybean itself. And then of course, soy sauce. And if you are familiar with soy, you may have heard some concern expressed from people. And just to kind of get the very basics of this, soy, along with other legumes such as peanuts and chickpeas, contain compounds called isoflavones. And isoflavones are structured similarly to the hormone estrogen, which is in all humans, but predominantly females, which made some people worried that maybe eating soy and these isoflavones would affect our hormone levels. However, a lot of research has been done in this area, and it turns out that soy isoflavones don't affect our bodies in the same way as estrogen. So it's not going to affect development of sexual characteristics or your menstrual cycles or anything like that. It's just structured similarly. And it turns out there's actually a lot of health benefits of eating soy and these isoflavones, including a lower risk of breast cancer, a lower total and LDL or bad cholesterol levels, slightly lower frequency of menopausal hot flashes, and a lower blood pressure in people with high blood pressure when they replaced meat with a soy-based product. There are some people who should maybe be more careful with soy though, and those are people with thyroid issues, particularly hypothyroidism, so an underactive thyroid. They need to be careful about when they eat soy, so they don't need to completely avoid it, but when they take medications for hypothyroidism, they are advised to take those on an empty stomach because the isoflavones and other foods can interfere with the absorption of those medications. So, but just kind of in summary, for people who don't have any thyroid issues, soy is completely safe and, like I said, beneficial. So soy consumption does not cause thyroid issues in people with normally functioning thyroids. So now we're going to get into kind of the meat of the presentation, and these are the different life stages that we talked about in the objectives. First, we're going to talk about soy and pregnancy. So you guys are probably familiar with plant-based diets, either directly or indirectly, such as vegetarian and vegan diets. These are helpful for all age groups and life stages when appropriately planned. And that is the position of the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So some people may choose to eat plant-based, vegetarian or vegan diets for a variety of reasons, including cultural or religious reasons, health concerns, because they're just in generally more eco-friendly, or they're very passionate about animals. And those are all completely good reasons to choose a plant-based diet. But like I said, we do need to plan those carefully. And so first I'll go over the difference between a vegetarian diet and a vegan diet. And a vegetarian diet includes no flesh products, so no meat, poultry, fish, or seafood, but they may or may not include dairy and eggs. So a lacto-ovo-vegetarian includes dairy and eggs. A lacto-vegetarian includes dairy but no eggs, and an ovo-vegetarian includes eggs but no dairy. And then a vegan diet has no animal products, so none of those flesh products, and no dairy and no eggs, and then sometimes or maybe not honey. And it's just important to kind of understand the difference between these two when you have a child or a family member who follows a plant-based diet, like someone in your program. So during pregnancy specifically, plant-based diets are safe and nutritious during pregnancy, kind of like I said before, during all life stages when they're planned well. So expectant mothers need to be careful that they get enough calories, protein, and other nutrients. And here's where soy comes in. Soy milk and other soy products are great sources for many important nutrients for pregnant women, including protein and iron, calcium, vitamin B12, and vitamin D. Those are all really important nutrients for the fetus's growth and development. And it's important to get those during pregnancy along with many other nutrients, but soy is a good source of these. So you may have heard of whole versus refined soy foods, and some soy products like soy-based protein powders go through a lot of processing, and this separates the soy protein from the healthy fats, the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals, and the isoflavones that are all very beneficial. And thus, whole soy foods or unprocessed soy, less processed soy foods are preferable to these highly processed soy foods because they lack so many nutrients. So soy-based protein powders for people who are weightlifting or just need a little bit more protein in their diet, that's fine. Like all foods fit kind of model. But when you're pregnant or a child and you or really any age group, and you need to get those healthy fats, those vitamins and minerals and fiber, it's better to choose whole soy foods. So here's a brief idea of the difference. So whole soy foods include a couple other things that I didn't list here, but also tofu, miso, tempeh, soybeans, soy milk, and edamame. Whereas the highly processed soy foods are the soy protein isolates. So that is like those soy-based protein powders, like I mentioned earlier, but also soy-based veggie burgers, pretty much any kind of soy-based meat replacement that isn't tofu or tempeh. So like the artificial Beyond Meat kind of things that are soy-based will have more of that soy protein isolate, and also soy flour, including textured vegetable protein. These are all very processed and just have just the protein pretty much. So we want to aim to include more of the whole soy foods because they have just more nutrients in general. So to give a brief summary, vegetarian and vegan diets are appropriate for all ages, including pregnancy, but they need to be planned carefully. Pregnant women should focus on getting a protein from a variety of sources, including soy. So whether they're plant-based or they eat meat and flesh products, they should still focus on a well-rounded diet, and they can definitely include soy in that diet. Whole soy foods are preferred over highly processed soy products. So that was just those protein isolates and vegetable proteins are not as preferred as the edamame and the tofu and the tempeh because they have more nutrients. So now we have another poll. Should tempeh be eaten during pregnancy? So it would be great if you guys could answer that. I think Mary's gonna pop it up for you.
Can you see the results, Rachel?
Yes, so we have 96% said yes, it is great to include tempeh in a well-rounded diet, and 4% said no, it is dangerous for pregnant women. So we actually can include tempeh because it is one of those whole soy foods that's very nutritious for people on plant-based diets or any kind of diet, really. All right, so let's see. So here, now we'll talk about soy and infancy. Oh, it kicked me out again. One second, guys. Okay, soy and infancy. So now we'll move on to the exciting stage of babyhood. So first, we'll talk about soy-based formula. And to give you a brief overview of what soy-based formula is made of, first, soy protein, but also vegetable oil, and often including the soy oil, like I mentioned earlier. And then it's often supplemented with omega-3 fatty acids, which you might have heard of. A carbohydrate source that's highly digestible, as well as fortification with vitamins and minerals, including iron and zinc, which are very important for infants. And this is all regulated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So pretty much any soy-based infant formula out there, it has to abide by those standards, and so they're all going to meet a baby's needs. And to give a brief comparison between soy-based formula and cow's milk formula, I've kind of separated it into two different brands. First, the Similac Soy Isomil versus Similac Advanced. And in 5.3 fluid ounces, there's pretty much the same composition of calories, fat, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. The only thing that's really even a little bit just different is the protein content. So as you can see, soy isomil from Similac includes slightly more protein than the cow's milk formula. And this is because soy-based protein is not quite as well absorbed by the body than cow's milk-based protein. So that it's not that the baby's getting extra protein from the formula, it's just there to kind of compensate for that lack of absorption. So overall, the baby's going to be getting the same nutrition from pretty much from these two different formulas. And then there's the Gerber Good Start Soy versus Gerber Good Start Gentle Pro. And these ones also had very similar profiles, except for a slight difference in the protein again. So again, that's just due to absorption. So it's not going to make a huge difference. And then I also put the prices on here so that you could kind of see that for the Similac, soy isomil was slightly expensive, $1.20 per ounce compared to $1.07 per ounce for the Similac Advanced cow's milk-based formula. But the Gerber Good Start Soy and Gerber Good Start Gentle Pro were the same price per ounce. So it just kind of depends on where you're buying the formula. But overall, I bet you're probably wondering, when would someone use soy formula? And this is mainly in the case of cow's milk protein allergy or vegan diet preference, but I'll go over some other cases. I know that you're probably familiar with lactose intolerance and that being present in children and adults. However, this is very uncommon in infants. It doesn't normally appear before a child's 3rd birthday. So lactose intolerance isn't normally found in infants, but cow's milk protein allergy can be. So that is a little bit different because it's an allergy to the protein in cow's milk versus lactose intolerance is not an allergy, but just a reaction that the person has to the sugar lactose. So these are two different things, and cow's milk protein allergy is present in approximately 2 to 7.5 of infants. So we're not totally sure the exact prevalence, but what should be noted is that approximately 10 to 14% of infants with cow's milk protein allergy may also be allergic to soy formula. So when a pediatrician finds that the child is allergic to cow's milk protein, they also need to be careful about recommending soy because the child could be allergic to that too. So if the child is allergic to both, then they normally recommend a hydrolyzed formula, which tend to be a little more expensive and don't quite taste the same. So they try to avoid recommending that as and only to those who need it. There's also galactosemia, but this is a very rare condition, so I'm not going to go into it very often. And then vegan diet preference. So besides vegan diet preference, a physician will diagnose or recommend use of soy infant formula for those other conditions. But with vegan diet preference, if the mother is unable to or unwilling to breastfeed, then there's not really any other option that is plant-based besides soy-based infant formula, because then they wouldn't be able to have cow's milk formula. And then there's also some instances when soy-based formula should not be used, including if the infant is preterm. So if it's born too early and it's given soy-based infant formula, that increases their risk of weak bones. So we try to avoid that. Instead, they are recommended to either feed breast milk, which is then fortified with extra nutrients, or cow's milk-based preterm, specifically infant formula. There's also other certain medical conditions which physicians would find and diagnose, including sucrase isomaltase deficiency and hereditary fructose intolerance. But you wouldn't really need to worry about that unless the physician would find that and diagnose it. So there's also, like I mentioned before, the hypothyroidism. It's not necessarily that babies with hypothyroidism can't have soy-based formula. It's just it would complicate their treatment. So they would have to monitor their hormone levels very carefully. And that, again, would be something found by a physician. And kind of going back to that how some people were concerned earlier, I did want to touch on this. Children and adults who consume moderate amounts of soy, they're ingesting just very few isoflavones. However, when infants are exclusively fed soy-based infant formula, they have a higher exposure to these isoflavones, and they're going through developmental stages that may be more sensitive to isoflavones. So these are the basic reasons why there has been a lot of research going into this area, this topic, and what they found is that the majority of research has shown that there's no adverse effect of feeding babies soy-based infant formula. And the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences concluded in their huge review of the research that there is minimal concern for adverse effects of soy infant formula. So overall, it's pretty safe. We don't need to be concerned about it. What is also something to be mentioned, and this is kind of getting into the introducing solids section. So when babies are around 6 months old, soy is, like I mentioned before, potentially allergenic. So babies may be allergic to soy. And soy is actually one of the top 8 allergenic foods, including these other ones that I have a picture of over on the left, with up to 0.7% of children in the US being allergic to soy. However, this is a relatively low number compared to like peanuts or cow's milk. Those are like closer to 2% of the population. So it's not as prevalent as some of these other allergies. And children who are allergic to soy often, like I think 70% of the time, outgrow it before their 10th birthday. So even if they are allergic to soy as a child, they normally outgrow it. And some relatively new guidelines recommend introducing these foods when an infant is around 6 months old. So when a child has signs of allergies like eczema or egg allergy or peanut allergy, you may need to be very careful, and the parents would need to be very careful about introducing other potentially allergenic foods and should do so with the advice of a physician. But for infants without eczema or any other allergies, it's safe to introduce soy, but you do want to watch just for any signs of allergic reaction. And there's a couple good options for introducing solids. So I don't know what your policy is at your program. I would imagine that you normally let the parents introduce the foods at first, and then kind of see what they introduce, and then introduce it at your program. But it probably depends on the program. However, for when you want to feed babies soy, you can offer tofu is a great option, especially for those who do baby-led weaning, because it's a good source of iron, especially over soy milk. So you actually, normally with older children and adults, we like our tofu cooked. It doesn't have much of a flavor when it's uncooked and doesn't have like a marinade or anything. But with infants who are experiencing food, and this is a whole new world to them, tofu, even though it doesn't taste like much to us, to them, it's a whole new texture, it's a whole new flavor. So you don't really need to cut it. So, or cook it, I'm sorry. But when a baby is following like infant-led feeding or baby-led weaning, whatever you want to call it, you can cut the tofu into little strips the size of like your pinky finger, and allow the baby to pick it up and self-feed. This would be preferable with a firmer form of tofu because it just doesn't crumble as easily. And I'll go over what the difference between firm and soft forms of tofu are later. Or you could mash or blend soft tofu and spoon feed it, or mix it with other foods that the baby has tried before, like pureed peas. You could blend some soft tofu into there. There's also soy milk, but this is not intended to replace breast milk or infant formula. So soy milk is not a substitute, just to keep that in mind. There's also soy yogurt, and you do need to be careful of the sugar content with those, though, kind of like normal yogurt. And then cooked and mashed soybeans, which I'll talk about kind of how those are prepared later. It is quite a process, but I would imagine that it would be fine to feed to infants. So to give a quick summary, soy-based infant formulas are safe and they're a great option for infants with certain conditions or vegan families. Soy is also a potentially allergenic food that should be introduced around 6 months along with other solid foods. And you could do that in the form of tofu, soy milk, soy yogurt, or those cooked and mashed soybeans. So I think we've got another poll being, at what age should soy foods such as tofu be introduced to babies?
Can you see that poll?
Yes, I can. So we had no one answer before 4 months, and then we had 96% of people say around 6 months and 4% say after 1 year. So with the recommendations as they are now, with this newer research where they're saying to introduce potentially allergenic foods around 6 months, and that includes soy and soy foods. So we would want to stay around 6 months, yes. All right, there we go. So now we'll move on and talk about soy in childhood and how to feed older children soy. So like I mentioned before, vegetarian and vegan diets in childhood they're appropriate for all ages and life stages. They just need to be planned carefully. So this includes childhood. And soy foods are a great source of protein, calcium, iron, and vitamin D, as well as vitamin B12. I didn't mention that. Those are great for children, especially those that follow plant-based diets. Sorry. So soy products can be served to children who eat meat and dairy products too, though. And in fact, introducing them to a variety of foods, especially protein foods and vegetables and whatnot, including soy, is a great way to promote a healthy, balanced diet. So I hear that you are all CACFP or Child and Adult Care Food Program certified programs. So you may be already aware of some of these creditable foods, but as of 2017, CACFP allows many soy foods and allows them to be creditable to support cultural and dietary diversity. And these include soy milk, soybeans, soy butter, soy nuts, soy yogurt, edamame, tofu, and tempeh. They're all currently creditable through CACFP. So now we're going to go through, kind of talk about them one by one, how you can credit them and how you can incorporate them into your menu. So to give a brief comparison between soy milk and cow's milk, they're very similar, and I used whole milk here since that is what is encouraged for or required for infants 1 to 2 years. But so the composition would change slightly for skim milk and 1% milk just being less calories and less fat. However, with soy milk and whole cow's milk or vitamin D, whatever you want to call it, there's slightly more calories in cow's milk. There's also more protein, more fat in the whole milk version, and slightly more sugar. However, these are natural sugars in the cow's milk, lactose and whatnot, whereas in the soy milk, these are added sugars. Calcium is also equivalent in both of those, but the soy milk is what is fortified with that, and vitamin D is the same as well, but again, and those are both fortified. And fortification just means it's a nutrient or compound that is not naturally present in high amounts in that food or beverage unless it is added to it. So they take separate sugar, separate calcium, separate vitamin D, and they add it in. That's what the fortification means. So when we go through but this soy milk is also the average soy milk that was kind of done in like a large survey of soy milks. So the different brands are going to have different compositions, but the cow's milk will be about the same even with different brands. And so soy milk in CACFP is creditable as milk with two conditions. First, the family must have a written request on file, and the nutrients have to be nutritionally equal to cow's milk. So there's several products meeting this requirement, all these brands. So if you don't have these CACFP creditable handbook, or I think I took this from the Iowa Department of Education, had a creditable handbook, creditable guide thing. I would take a picture of this if you want to. I also do want to mention that if the family wants a different brand, there has to be a documentation from a prescribing medical professional, so a doctor or physician's assistant is required for any other brand. So if the family wants one of these brands or is okay with any brand, they just have to have a family's written request. You don't need a doctor's note. But if a family wants a different brand, there has to be a doctor's note. Flavored milk, as you probably already know, is also only able to be served to participants 6 years and older. So any flavored milk, including this vanilla or the smart chocolate or whatever, has to be served to participants who are 6 and older. They can't be served to children younger than 6. And some different recipe ideas that you could use for just incorporating soy milk can really be used in any place in place of cow's milk. So you can use it to thin fruit smoothies, pour it over cold cereal, use it to make oatmeal, either hot or overnight oats. You can mix it into mashed potatoes or mashed sweet potatoes. You could also use it to make creamy soups and sauces. So there's a wide variety of applications for this, similar to how there is with cow's milk. And yeah, so I didn't recommend any specific recipes here, just because there's just a lot out there. So I will for some of the other components though. So specifically soybeans, and then edamame as well, and CACFP. So soybeans can be creditable as a vegetable or a meat alternate. And this would be a half cup of cooked soybeans is equivalent to a half cup of vegetable, or a fourth a cup of cooked soybeans is creditable as 1 ounce meat alternate, and it cannot count as both categories in one meal. So if you have like the recipe that I mentioned later, that can either be the protein, or I mean meat alternate, or the vegetable. And then there's also edamame, which I found some conflicting information about this. Most of the sources that I saw that were from CACFP said it only counts as a vegetable. It does not count as a meat alternate. But then there was a couple other sources from CACFP that said it could be a meat alternate. So I'm not totally sure on that one, and I apologize. I just didn't find consistent information about it. So some recipe ideas specific for soybeans, particularly soybeans aren't cooked with that much in the US, but many Asian dishes include them. And this could be because they take quite a bit of preparation. So it is important to pre-soak dried soybeans in the refrigerator for 8 to 10 hours before cooking. And that refrigerator part is important because if you leave them at room temperature, they'll start to ferment, which you don't want. Then you'll also rinse and drain the soybeans both before and after soaking. And you also want to sort out any kind of with regular dried beans, you want to make sure there's no grit or pebbles in there. And then after soaking, you have to boil the soybeans for 3 to 4 hours. You could also cook them in some sort of pressure cooker, and this would probably take significantly less time. But just a typical boiling on the stove, it would take 3 to 4 hours for them to cook completely. So I have a recipe here from Masala Soybeans, and I have one of the handouts that I have in the webinar has the links to all of the recipes that I feature today, as well as the ones that I just link and don't feature. So I would download that if you are interested. So here we have our 150 gram soybeans, which is about 3/4 a cup of dried soybeans, and then a lot of aromatics, tomato, turmeric powder, and some different seasonings. And this, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm imagining it's like kat or chat masala. So that's a good option. And this was just one that I found online. I couldn't find any specific for dried soybeans or canned soybeans on the CACFP website, but most of the ones I do mention today will be on CACFP. So edamame recipes. Edamame is often either sold in its pods or shelled. It's often frozen, but you could probably find it fresh in some places. So I would recommend steaming them and serving them as like an appetizer or mixing it up and doing a side dish. Older children may enjoy popping the beans out of the pods. I don't know if you guys like sushi or Japanese or Chinese restaurants and get the edamame there, but it's always fun to just kind of pop all the soybeans out into your mouth. So I think older children would like that. I'm not sure how it works with the crediting for if they're already in a pod. I would imagine it's a little bit different, but I couldn't find any guidance on that. And then I have this corn and edamame blend recipe. So it's got edamame that is already, that was frozen, but is now thawed and drained, and it's out of their pods. But it also has corn and carrots, and then some different seasonings. And it looked pretty simple. And there was also on this source where I got it from, there was also an option for 25 servings. So if you have a larger center and want to up the servings, that's also in the handout. So now we'll get into the fun part, tofu. I'm really excited about this. So tofu comes in a variety of different applications, from extra soft to firm to extra firm. Oh, that got a little cut off there. Sorry, extra firm is what that says. And this just kind of depends on how much they pressed the tofu when making it and pressed the water out. So with extra soft tofu, there's not actually a lot of protein in it. There's just not much, whereas especially compared to the extra firm tofu, where it's got a much higher concentration of protein. And this is important for CACFP, which it gets a little complicated, but I'll go into. But I do want to mention, like I said before, I started cooking with tofu the last few weeks, and it's been really cool. There's a couple different recipes that I've tried, and there's some different options for making it as well. So tofu is great because children can eat it pretty easily. It's not, I know some children who have like aversions to like the like chicken or beef because they don't like the texture. So this is a very different texture than meat. It's nice and soft. The children can eat it pretty well. And it also takes on the flavor of whatever you're cooking it in. So if you marinate it or add a sauce to it, it's really gonna soak up that flavor, and you can kind of do whatever you want with it, which is really awesome. So I've tried some of the recipes that I featured today, and I highly recommend trying these out. But first, we'll talk about how to credit tofu as a meat alternate. So first off, like I said, tofu, depending on its firmness, has different concentrations of protein. So for it to be creditable by CACFP, a 2.2 ounces or about 1/4 of a cup of tofu must have at least 5 grams of protein in order to count as a meat alternate. And these two blurbs that I have here are taken directly from the CACFP handbook or the memorandum that they added. So firm or extra firm tofu may credit towards a meat or meat alternate in stir fries, omelets, miso soup. I'll also add, there's also a lot of other recipes that you could use it in, but soft or silken tofu that is incorporated into drinks such as smoothies or added to other dishes for texture and nutrition, such as in baked desserts, does not credit toward the meat alternate component. So although it's a great option for making, especially for vegan children who can't have like ranch or smoothies with milk and stuff like that, soft or silken tofu, which is the extra soft silken, is a great option there. You just won't be able to credit it as a meat component. And then it gets a little bit more complicated. So if you have if you're serving a dish that already contains tofu, that tofu component must have at least 5 grams of protein per 2.2 ounces. So like I said, if you're serving just tofu or tofu that you're preparing, and it has the 2.2 ounces has 5 grams of protein, that's great. It's creditable. However, when it's already pre-mixed into a dish, you can't just look at the nutrition facts label or for the tofu for the entire dish and say, oh, it's got 5 grams of protein, I'm good. Because that's not looking at the tofu, it's looking at the whole dish. So instead, you'll need to find a child nutrition label or a product formulation statement to determine if the tofu contains enough protein to be creditable. So overall, the tofu component, the tofu that's mixed into the dish alone has to have the 5 grams of protein per 2.2 ounces. It can't just be the whole dish has 5 grams of protein. So you do need to be careful there. So I do have some recipe ideas for soft tofu, but like I said, it normally does not have enough protein per 2.2 ounces to be creditable under CACFP, but there are some cool ideas that you could try out at home to just kind of increase your protein intake or your soy intake, or if you're plant-based, these are some great options, including a blueberry tofu smoothie, spinach tofu dip. This next one I made, it was really good. This no-bake peanut butter chocolate tofu pie. It's really tasty. You just like melt the chocolate and then bake the pie crust, blend everything together besides the pie crust in a blender, and then just pour it over the top and let it sit. It's really easy and it's pretty tasty too. And then the vegan chocolate fudge brownies, which sound amazing. And then there's the firm tofu recipe ideas. And I didn't give the recipes in the PowerPoint for those last ones, but they are in the handout, so you can still find them there. Firm tofu recipe ideas. So they're great in a variety of applications. You could scramble them, saute it, stir fry it, bake it, and it kind of gives a different flavor depending, like I said, it just takes on the flavor of whatever you're making. So I have this Southwest tofu scramble, which is like kind of like a scrambled eggs with veggies and stuff, but instead of eggs, you use tofu. And then there's sauteed tofu and broccoli, and pesto penne with baked tofu bites. And these are all from different CACFP sources. And I do have some tips here that I have picked up along my journey, is that when you have firm or extra firm tofu, or even super firm is an option too, you can press it to squeeze out excess liquid, allowing it to soak up more of the marinade or sauce. And when I say press, I mean put like a towel or paper towel underneath the tofu, put the tofu down, put a paper towel or regular towel on top, and then put something heavy and flat on it, like a book or a cast iron pan, or a cookie sheet with like cans stacked on top of it, and just let it sit for 30 minutes before you cook with it. And yeah, that'll really allow it to soak up more marinade or sauce or whatever you're doing with it. Also, this is something that I haven't tried, but I've heard from several other people who I've been kind of using my networking the last few weeks, and a lot of people have recommended freezing and then thawing the tofu, so you don't cook it from frozen. You freeze it and then you thaw it once or even twice before cooking, and this will give the tofu a more meat-like texture, is what I've heard. So I've heard people who do tofu nuggets freeze and thaw it twice, and then cook it in the tofu nugget recipe kind of thing. I think they're baked. And that'll give it a more chicken meaty like texture, which a lot of people like. So I'm sorry I haven't tried it, but it does sound really cool. So here's this Southwest tofu scramble. So like I said, it doesn't contain any eggs, but instead it's tofu, and it's also quinoa. So if you haven't cooked with quinoa before, it's pretty similar to rice in its preparation method, but it does taste, and it has a slightly different texture, but it's a whole grain, so that's really awesome, and it's got a lot of nutrients too. So you mix that with the tofu and the spices and these veggies, and it comes out in this scramble. So again, this recipe is in the handout. and so is the sauteed tofu and broccoli. So for 6 servings, you actually use spaghetti noodles, whole wheat spaghetti noodles, which I think is supposed to kind of serve like a lo mein, chow mein kind of thing. And then the firm tofu, and here it says drained, but you could also press it beforehand. And a bunch of aromatics and other foods and spices, and then broccoli and some sesame seeds on top. So I thought that sounded really good to me. And then there's also this pesto penne with baked tofu bites. And the recipe where I got this from was actually a document from Wisconsin CACFP that had a bunch of tofu recipes. So that's in the handout. And it's got penne, which you could do whole wheat or whole grain, pesto, tomatoes, tofu, and Parmesan. So pretty quick and easy, honestly. And then next we'll talk about soy yogurt. So it is creditable as a meat alternate, similar to regular yogurt. And I didn't see anything about needing a family statement for soy yogurt. So I think you can just serve it as a meat alternate. And that is 1/2 cup or 4 fluid ounces is creditable as 1 ounce of meat alternate. And an example brand is Silk. It doesn't have to be Silk though, it could be quite a few other brands. And some ideas for incorporating soy yogurt would be, you could just eat it as is. There's lots of like fruit flavors for soy yogurt, just like regular yogurt. Or you could work it into other recipes in place of cow's milk yogurt. So like soy yogurt parfaits or smoothies with soy yogurt, or fruit and yogurt popsicles, or a soy yogurt dip for like apples and pineapple and stuff. That would all be great options for incorporating more of this soy yogurt. Sorry, my throat is pretty dry. One second. And then I didn't include recipes for those because they're all just kind of substitutions. But then there's tempeh. Tempeh is creditable as a meat alternate, and it's just that direct relationship. So 1 ounce of tempeh is 1 ounce of meat alternate. And I've included 2 pictures here. This one in the top right is uncooked, unprepared tempeh. And this one down here is, I think it's baked, is what it looks like, but it might also be sauteed. But I cooked with tempeh last week, and it was really tasty. We made teriyaki tempeh, which I'm going to recommend in a minute, which was quite a bit of work just for the tempeh. Plus we served it with brown fried rice, and that was really good. But it tasted really good, and it didn't taste anything like meat, but I thought that it was a really good substitution. So I wouldn't go in with the expectation that it tastes like meat, but that it's kind of its own thing, but it's very tasty. And some different recipe ideas that I found online would be tempeh bacon. So this would be just baking sliced tempeh. And I've got a recipe here. But it's great when you could layer it onto sandwiches, crumble it on top of baked potatoes, or just serve it as a plain side at breakfast. Again, there's this teriyaki tempeh, which I'll show you the recipe for, and a baked barbecue tempeh. Those are all really good. So here's this teriyaki tempeh. I'm not going to go into it too much because we're kind of running low on time, but it's in the handout. And then there's soy nuts. So soy nuts counts as a meat alternate, and 1 ounce of roasted soy nuts is a 1 ounce of meat alternate. So soy nuts, you can just buy them in like a bag. You can also soak soybeans and then roast them to make soy nuts. However, they may only count toward half of the meat or meat alternate requirements. And I also do want to point out that nuts are a choking hazard for young children, so use with caution. Similarly, soy butter is a meat alternate, and it can be used like peanut butter or other nut seed butters, where 2 tablespoons is 1 ounce meat alternate. And again, nut butters may pose a choking hazard for infants. So if you're introducing an infant to soy butter, I advise mixing it with breast milk, formula, or water before introducing. And I do have some recipe ideas for soy butter, including soy butter and jelly sandwiches, soy butter and chocolate chip cookies, ants on a log, overnight oats, and as a dip for apples. So there's you could just pretty much use it anywhere that it calls for peanut butter or other nut seed butters. What are not creditable in CACFP includes soy grits, soy cheese, and soy flour. And I didn't really see any detail on why this is, but just know that those are not creditable options. So overall, soy in childhood, just to give you a quick summary, is that soy foods provide a lot of important nutrients for children who follow plant-based diets, as well as children who eat animal products. And there's several soy foods that are creditable under CACFP, including soy milk, soybeans, soy butter, soy nuts, soy yogurt, edamame, tofu, and tempeh. So here's our last poll. Is tofu creditable under CACFP? I think Mary will open that up for you guys here in a second. Mary, are you opening it? I'm not sure. Mary, are you there? We might just have to move on, guys. Okay, sorry. Yeah, we'll just keep moving. So the answer is yes, tofu and several other soy foods are creditable. Oh. So just a quick review about everything that we talked about today. Oh, come on. We talked about the basics of soy, soy during pregnancy, soy during infancy, soy during childhood, and CACFP. So overall, soy is a safe and healthy option for all of these life stages, and they can be worked into CACFP centers quite frequently and easily. So that's brief overview. So before I go to questions, there's lots of references here that I just wanted to feature. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? You can throw them in the questions box or the chat. Do we have any questions? It looks like Mary's internet went down, so she lost us. But yeah, if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them. Okay, if no one has any questions, then you can. I think we're good to go. Oh, I think Mary said, yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys, I'm not sure what to do. So, Mary, if you want to email me kind of with what to do going forward, how to exit out. Okay. I think she said I can click end when webinar. Okay, well, thank you guys all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. Mary said she'll send out the certificates in the next 48 hours. So this was wonderful having you all. So thank you very much. I'm gonna click end webinar now.